In my past life, I finally got to marry the man I loved, Daniel Quinn. But after his death, thousands of love letters he had written to his first love were exposed. Their love story, transcending time and space, was glorified by the world, while I, his rightful wife, was vilified as the shameless third party. When I opened my eyes again, Daniel Quinn was about to give up on his first love because he couldn't afford the dowry and was turning his attention toward me instead. I was willing to sell my car and borrow money just to help him fulfill his love. Megan, I think it's over between me and Lily, he sighed. Her mother is demanding furniture with a total of 64 legs. If I can't provide it, she won't let Lily marry me. You know my family's situation. Where am I supposed to find 64 legs? Daniel took a sip of his drink. His eyes slightly reddened. His sharp nose carried a faint scent of books, and his face was filled with disappointment and pain. For a moment, I felt dazed, my mind flashing back to the gruesome scene of Daniel taking his own life for Lily Harper in my past life. Back then, he also drowned his sorrows in alcohol. Under the dim light and the intoxicating haze, he made a decision. He gave up on Lily Harper and turned to pursue me instead. I had secretly loved him for years. How could I resist the sweetness of his affection? So, I accepted his confession, agreed to his proposal, and married him. Despite his poverty, I dedicated myself to caring for his aging parents and even begged my father to pass down his factory director position to him. I followed him in a platonic marriage for 50 years, living a lifetime without children, only to realize he had remained faithful, not to me, but to his first love. I never controlled his finances and allowed him complete freedom. Yet he used our savings to support Lily Harper through her hardships. I helped him rise in the literary world and become a renowned author, while he funded Lily Harper's dreams, helping her enter the Met and become a celebrated ballet artist. If it weren't for Lily's unexpected death, if it weren't for Daniel Quinn taking his own life at home, if it weren't for the thousands of love letters being exposed, I might have spent my entire life enduring their deception, allowing them to exploit me. After their deaths, Daniel's students and Lily Harper's fans tirelessly worked to clear their names online. The world marveled at the purity of their love story, while I, still grieving the loss of my husband, was dragged into public outrage, ridiculed and condemned. The biggest victim of this entire ordeal, I was painted as the villain, the homewrecker who had destroyed a legendary love story. Now, I looked at Daniel Quinn, who was once again preparing to abandon Lily Harper and instead pursue me. Megan, just if. He hesitated, but before he could finish, I interrupted him. Lily is an only child. You know how her mother raised her. She only ever had the best of everything. It's normal for her mother to have these demands. As a man, you can't let the woman you love suffer. 64 legs of furniture. It's not that difficult. Daniel was stunned. He hadn't expected me to say that. Furrowing his brows, he said, 64 legs. That's a 3-seater sofa, a 5-foot bed, a 6-foot wardrobe, plus tables and chairs. It'll cost thousands. I barely make anything in a month. Where am I supposed to get the money for that? I rolled my eyes and suggested, there's a furniture discount warehouse in the suburbs. The prices are quite reasonable. He scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. Those are all second-hand, worn-out pieces. Lily's mother would never agree. I remained serious. I know a craftsman who's an expert at refurbishing furniture. Once he works his magic, those old pieces will look brand new. And his prices are cheap. Daniel was skeptical. Really? I nodded. If you don't believe me, bring one of your chairs over and have him fix it up. If it works out, you and Lily will be set. He hesitated. But if I manage to get those 64 legs, what if Lily's mother demands something else? Of course, she will. I knew all too well that Lily's parents, obsessed with appearances, would never stop at just this one demand. But I couldn't say that to Daniel. Instead, I smiled and said, no matter what Lily's mother asks for, as long as you and Lily truly love each other, I believe love can conquer everything. Besides, the one benefiting from all these demands isn't her mother. It's you and Lily who will actually use the furniture. Daniel pursed his lips. I added, Lily's mother is an elementary school teacher. And her father is a doctor at a community clinic. They're respectable people with good social standing. In the future, everything they earn will belong to Lily anyway. It's all yours anyway. If you're nitpicking over this, you just seem stingy. Daniel took a deep breath and then asked, someone like you. Your dad is a factory director. Your mom is a department head. If you were getting married, would your parents make these kinds of demands? My heart skipped a beat. I suddenly recalled my answer in my past life. If I loved someone, I wouldn't need 64 legs of furniture, wouldn't need a dowry, wouldn't even need his parents to come propose. As long as he loved me too, I could marry him immediately. It was after that statement that Daniel started looking at me differently, his gaze no longer simple. Why aren't you saying anything? He asked, noticing my momentary distraction. I smiled slightly. Of course, I would never make the same demands as Lily Harper. A flicker of hope flashed in Daniel's eyes. But before he could say anything, I continued. I would ask for 128 legs of furniture, at least a dowry of $20,000. Before the wedding, there must be an engagement banquet with 20 tables. The wedding procession must include 10 Santana cars. I won't live in company-provided housing. My fiancé must own a high-ranking government villa, at least 5 stories tall, with an elevator, a private bathroom, and a full set of modern appliances. Fridge, color TV, washing machine, a sewing machine? No need for that. I'll buy new clothes from the mall every month. Old clothes should be thrown away. Homemade clothes from a sewing machine are just too ugly. As I went on, Daniel's expression grew darker and darker. By the time I ran out of things to say, my mouth dry from speaking, he forced a laugh. With standards like that, you might have trouble getting married in this lifetime. Feigning ignorance. I raised an eyebrow. Exactly. My parents said if I can't find someone who meets these requirements, I won't get married. They're perfectly happy to support me for life. Daniel let out an awkward chuckle. I narrowed my eyes. So what I'm saying is, Lily Harper is already a rare and wonderful woman. If you miss this opportunity, there won't be another. You should hold on tight. Otherwise, you might never get married either. His eyes darkened, his fingers tightening into a fist, as if making up his mind. He responded firmly, "You're right. I need to hold on to Lily." With that, he stood up. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To the second-hand market to pick out furniture," he replied. "Give me the craftsman's address later." I nodded. "All right." Daniel hauled back 64 legs worth of furniture from the second-hand market and brought them to the craftsman for refurbishment. A fresh coat of paint was applied, and once it had dried, he invited Lily Harper's parents over to inspect it. Mr. and Mrs. Harper were delighted with what they saw and immediately agreed to the wedding. But then came Mrs. Harper's next demand, an 8-table banquet. She insisted the wedding be held at a state-run restaurant, where a single table cost $100, excluding alcohol. That meant $800 just for the food. I had a feeling this wedding wasn't going to happen. Early in the morning, as I was washing up at the communal water basin, Daniel appeared beside me, looking utterly defeated. In the past, I would have stood by his side and helped him think of a solution. But now, I had learned my lesson. Lily's parents had wide social connections. With their daughter getting married, they would naturally want to invite all their friends and family, the school's leadership and staff, the hospital's doctors and nurses. Everyone had to be included. 8 tables meant about 80 guests. Lily's parents had probably calculated everything down to the last detail. These guests weren't just random people. They were connections that could help pave the way for Daniel and Lily's future. There's no such thing as a free meal. One banquet could establish his standing among these people. It was an opportunity far too good to pass up. The benefits he'd gain would far exceed the $800 he'd have to spend. Plenty of people would love the chance to treat school and hospital officials to a meal. Yet they never even get the opportunity. How could he just give up on this so easily? My words reignited a spark in Daniel's eyes. But just as quickly, it dimmed again. "You're right. Lily's parents are doing this for my benefit too. But I already spent all my money on the second-hand furniture. Where am I supposed to come up with another $800? I raised an eyebrow. "Then borrow it." "You mean, you'd lend it to me?" he asked hesitantly. "I don't have that much. But I can help you borrow it. How? Of course. We'll borrow it in your name. Daniel was an employee at the textile factory. Living in the factory dormitory, he was known for being helpful. And since my father thought highly of him, he had built a good reputation. Once word got around that he needed money for his wedding, people would be willing to lend him a hand. The only problem was that Daniel couldn't bring himself to go door to door asking for money. So, I did it for him. No amount was too small. Whether someone could lend $100 or just 10, everything added up. The textile factory was big, and Daniel had strong relationships with many people. In the end, I managed to gather $1,500 for him. When I placed the cash in front of him, his jaw nearly hit the floor. You actually managed to borrow this much? I smiled. It's a little over $1,400. I pitched in a bit to round it up to $1,500. Just count it and go book the banquet at the state-run restaurant. Daniel stared at the money, but instead of looking happy, he slumped into a chair. Disheartened. How long will it take me to pay this all back? He muttered, already sounding like he wanted to give up again. I sighed, forcing myself to be patient. Do you really think Lily's parents would let her marry you if it meant taking on debt? Do you think Lily is the kind of person who would tolerate being in debt? Daniel's eyes flickered uncertainly. This is just temporary. I continued. Once you get on their good side and marry Lily, you can tell her the truth. She'll definitely use her dowry to help pay it back. A glimmer of hope returned to his face, but he hesitated. But, if she finds out I borrowed all this money just for the banquet, won't she be upset? I shook my head firmly. Why would she be upset? She's kind, understanding. She knows how hard things are for you. You went to all this trouble just to please her parents, to marry her. If anything, when she finds out, she'll feel sorry for you. Daniel still looked uncertain, so I pressed on. Lily is nothing like me. I'm selfish and calculating, only looking out for my own interests. But she's famous for her kindness and generosity. That did the trick. Gritting his teeth, Daniel snatched up the $1,500 and went straight to Lily's parents to book the banquet at the state-run restaurant. As soon as he left, my nosy neighbors started poking their heads out from their doors, whispering megong themselves. Have you lost your mind? One of them scoffed. If Daniel can't come up with the money and breaks things off with that girl, wouldn't that be a good thing for you? Exactly. Another chimed in. Why are you going out of your way to help him? If he doesn't marry Lily, wouldn't you have a chance? Seriously. Someone else muttered. Daniel's such a good guy. How did he end up getting bewitched by that girl? You and Daniel would make a great pair. If you two got together, your parents would be so relieved. I quickly waved my hands. No. I'm still young. My parents want to keep me around for a couple more years. Don't drag me into this whole marriage thing. The neighbors looked at me strangely. Didn't you like Daniel a lot? Now you don't. I grinned. You ladies keep pushing people to get married. But tell me, what's so great about marriage? They blinked in confusion. What do you mean? What's great about it? I tilted my head. You get married. Have kids. Your body changes. You take care of in-laws. Clean the house. Run around all day. And in the end, your husband still calls you an old nag. I don't want any part of that life. The women's faces soured. How can you say that? I just raised an eyebrow at them. They soon walked away, but not before glaring at me. After all, what I said had hit a nerve. That evening, I sat at the front yard cracking sunflower seeds, listening to a group of little kids playing in the mud while gossiping. Daniel is really going all out this time. He took Lily Harper's parents to the state-run restaurant and booked 8 tables for the wedding banquet. Yeah, and each table will have 2 packs of cigarettes, 2 bottles of liquor, and a bottle of soda. Oh, and there'll be wedding candy for everyone too. This afternoon. He even promised to take Lily to the county to get 2 sets of wedding outfits made. The wedding is set for 2 weeks from now. Hearing this, I nodded to myself. It seemed like this wedding was officially set in stone. One of the kids turned to me. Look at you, chasing after Daniel for all these years. And in the end, you got nothing. I feel bad for you. I crossed my legs and casually handed him a handful of sunflower seeds. Feel bad for me? Do you think marriage is a good thing? The kid took the seeds and thought for a moment. I don't know if it's good or bad, but everyone seems to like getting married. My parents did. My 2 brothers. And my 2 sisters too. Even though they argue all the time, they still got married. Then he suddenly leaned in closer and whispered, Megan, why don't you wait for me? When I grow up, I'll marry you. I chuckled. Why do you want to marry me? The little boy grinned. Because you're pretty. 100 times prettier than Lily Harper. I like you. His sudden confession made me reach out and pinch his cheek. He yelped in pain and pouted. What was that for? You can't just pinch your future husband like that. I huffed and playfully kicked him on the butt. Go play somewhere else. You little rascal. But he got serious, wiping the mud off his hands before looking me straight in the eye. Megan, listen to me. When I grow up, I'll get you 128 legs of furniture, a fridge, a washing machine, a TV, and at least 9 cars for your wedding procession. I'll book 18 tables at the state-run restaurant. You won't have to envy Lily Harper at all. His determined expression almost moved me to tears. If only his face weren't still smeared with snot. Just then, Daniel came back, looking pleased with himself. He was carrying a stack of wedding invitations. Seeing me, he handed one over. Megan, this wedding wouldn't have happened without your help. This one's for your parents. You'll sit at the main table with us. Of course, I knew he wasn't inviting me to the main table out of sentimentality. It was because he valued my father, the factory director. I smiled. All right. I'll make sure to let my dad know. Daniel also handed an invitation to the little boy. Give this to your parents. They should come celebrate too. The kid took the invitation and, in a sulky tone, muttered, Daniel, I'm telling you, when I get married, my wedding will be even grander than yours. Daniel just laughed, not taking it seriously. The sky was getting dark. We each returned to our rooms. Not long after, my dad came home. He picked up the wedding invitation, his face unreadable. He sighed again and again, then turned to comfort me. Daniel is a good guy, but our daughter deserves someone even better. Don't be sad. My mom, having heard that Daniel and Lily's wedding was officially set, specially bought some meat that evening and made me a rich broth. When she placed the bowl in front of me, she also tried to console me. That boy Daniel isn't all that special. If he couldn't end up with you, that's his loss. I ate the meat heartily, completely unbothered. Mom, Dad, I'm really not sad. He's just a man. They were surprised at how easily I let go. Really? You're not upset at all? Of course not. But right now, everyone thinks you love Daniel so much that you're willing to go to ridiculous lengths for his wedding. If you really loved him that much, wouldn't it make more sense to let the wedding fall apart so you could have a chance? I rolled my eyes. A chance? What kind of awful chance is that? Your daughter doesn't need something like that. No matter how I explained, my parents still believed I was heartbroken. After all, they had seen firsthand how much effort I had put into Daniel before. I couldn't be bothered to keep arguing, so I changed the subject. How much money do you 2 have right now? My parents immediately frowned. Why? You're not thinking of giving it to Daniel, are you? They were so cautious, as if terrified I might steal from the family to help him. I sighed and reassured them. No. Why does everything have to be about Daniel? He's getting married, and I'm not stupid enough to chase after him. I have other plans. That made them hesitate. What do you need money for? Then, the government is opening up opportunities for private businesses now. I want to start my own business. I need some money to buy inventory. My dad took a sip of his liquor and frowned. Having ambition is good, but becoming a private business owner? That's too lowly. I didn't know how to explain to him that in just a few years, many state-run enterprises would collapse, and a wave of layoffs would sweep through the country. Society was about to undergo massive change. What I was doing wasn't reckless. It was adapting. Dad, your mindset is too outdated. We're all working-class people. There's no such thing as noble or lowly work. I just want to follow the government's new policies. Besides, I'm not asking for much. Just $1,000. After much persuading, my parents finally agreed to let me try running my own business. The next day, I took the money and went to the city to look at rental spaces. But shop rents were already soaring, and $1,000 wasn't nearly enough to open a store. My parents had worked their whole lives to save that much, and they were giving it to me out of love. I couldn't afford to waste it. After thinking it over, I went to visit my uncle. He was a truck driver and had seen a lot of the world outside our town. I asked him for advice. He told me, electronics, clothing, and toys are big in Guangdong. Food products are mostly in Xiamen, Fujian. Steel and automobiles are booming in Hubei. Agricultural processing is growing in Hunan. Electronics and aviation are taking off in Sichuan and Shaanxi. If you're looking at tobacco, tea, or tourism, Yunnan is your best bet. Every city has its specialty. He continued. Right now, our northern region isn't fully embracing the market economy yet. If you want to do business, you'll have to go south. But with so many cities in the south, where should I go first? I asked. Go to Zhejiang, he suggested. Almost everyone there is a business owner. They value private enterprises more than anywhere else. If you can convince your parents, I'll take you with me on my business trip next week. You'll see for yourself. All right, I'll go talk to them now. I rushed home and told my parents my plan. They were stunned, as if I had just said something outrageous. You must be joking, my dad said, still trying to process it. I looked at them seriously. Dad, you're almost 60. Who knows how much longer you'll be factory director? If I don't start building something now, our family won't have any future. My father, always conservative, frowned. Since when is it your responsibility to support this family? Listen, I know Daniel's wedding hit you hard, but there are plenty of young men at the factory. I'll find you someone even better, my dad insisted. Once you get married, I'll pass the factory director position to your husband. I shook my head firmly. Dad, how can you guarantee that every man will be as responsible as you? What if I end up like Aunt Linda's family, marrying some useless gambling addict? Then what? For a moment, my dad was speechless. It was my mom who finally spoke up. Let her go. I'll give her $1,000 to take with her. At least if she's with her uncle, I'll feel a little more at ease. Just be careful out there. If you run into any trouble, don't be stubborn. Just give them the money and walk away. My dad still wanted to argue, but my mom held him back. Let her go. You know what they say. Some people won't turn back until they hit a dead end. If she doesn't go out and see the world for herself, she'll never give up on this idea. With a heavy sigh, my dad gave in and started packing my things. That very night, I booked 2 train tickets to Yiwu, Zhejiang. The next day, I boarded the green train with my uncle. This was my first time traveling so far by train. As I gazed out the window, I watched the barren northern landscape slowly transform into lush greenery. The moment I stepped off the train, I was overwhelmed by the bustling atmosphere of the marketplace. Everywhere I looked, people were carrying, dragging, or lugging around large bundles of goods. Their faces were filled with energy, their steps brisk, as if they were racing against time, afraid to fall behind. Back in the north, people held stable government jobs in the highest regard. But here in the south, no one cared about so-called stable jobs. While we were back home cracking sunflower seeds and sipping tea, these people were hustling, scrambling to secure inventory, negotiating deals, and fighting for every second. The energy was intoxicating. If it weren't for your aunt stopping me, I would have already joined in, my uncle said with a sigh. Do you know how much money you can make? These hair clips, for example, wholesale price here is only 30 cents each, but back home, they sell for $3. I was stunned. That much of a difference? Seeing my disbelief, my uncle took me straight to the market to check the prices. Sure enough, the exact same hair clips sold in northern department stores for 10 times the price. And that 30-cent price was already marked up for outsiders. I overheard a woman negotiating, and she was getting them for just 15 cents each. I immediately decided to stay in Yiwu for a few more days to get a better understanding of the market. Life in the south was completely different from the north. While we were still eating in collective cafeterias, the streets here were already lined with food stalls. Vendors would push their carts around, set up plastic stools, and in no time, steaming hot buns and fried dough sticks were being served. People walked briskly through the streets, eating breakfast on the go, some carrying bowls of noodles, others with plates of rice. Their steps were steady and confident. My uncle was completely enamored with the lively scene, but I was more focused on learning the trade. Every morning at 5, I would find a breakfast stall and sit among the locals, quietly listening to their conversations in thick regional dialects. It was hard to understand at first, but I slowly started picking up bits and pieces. I quickly learned that in this business, time was everything. If I wanted to secure the best inventory, I had to start at 2 in the morning. Arriving at the wholesale markets by 3, the place was a frenzy. Crowds haggling, carts rolling, money exchanging hands at lightning speed. By following the veteran traders, I learned how to negotiate. A pack of hair clips originally priced at 30 cents, each could be bargained down to 30 cents for 3. I ran back and forth between different vendors, observing which shopkeepers were the most reliable and which ones had the best deals. By the time my uncle was still figuring out which direction was which, I had already spent my entire $2,000 on inventory. My uncle was stunned. That's a lot of goods. Are you really planning to bring all this back to sell? Yeah. I nodded. But how? You know how expensive store rentals are. Right. I know. I replied. That's why I'm not opening a store. Then what? You're going to sell on the streets. Exactly. I need to test out different locations first. See where the foot traffic is. Figure out where the best sales are. Only after I start making money will I consider renting a store. My uncle stared at me in shock. Do you think your parents will allow this? I grinned. They already let me come this far. I might as well make something out of it. At the same time, I was well aware that, as a woman, this kind of work was risky. Just earlier, while my uncle was away, I had already noticed a few shady men eyeing me. It sent chills down my spine. For now, I needed to focus on getting these goods shipped back home. If the profits turned out as expected, I could then talk to my uncle and aunt about joining me in the business. After spending a week in Iwu, I returned home and set up my small street stall. I laid out hair accessories, trinkets, gloves, and hats on a waterproof cloth. And soon enough, people started asking about prices. I decided to sell everything at 20% off the standard department store prices. Most customers paid without hesitation, though there were always a few bargain-hunting elderly women who insisted on getting a little extra discount. Regardless, in just a few days, I had sold almost all my stock. That day, as I was calculating how to clear out the remaining inventory at lower prices and planning to discuss my next purchase with my uncle and aunt, the little boy who had once said he'd marry me suddenly showed up at my house, looking anxious. Megan, come out. Something big happened. Startled, I rushed to open the door, fearing something had happened to my parents. But as soon as I saw his face, I realized it wasn't about them. Today was Daniel's wedding. Oh, I had been so busy that I completely forgot. Well, I guess I won't be setting up my stall today. I need to go have some wedding banquet food. Wedding banquet? The little boy huffed. Lily's mother is refusing to attend unless Daniel arranges for 3 four-wheeled cars to pick them up. Otherwise, she won't go to the restaurant for the wedding. I froze. Even at this point, Lily's mother was still causing trouble? The kid clicked his tongue. Who knows why? Daniel's been standing outside the Harper house for 2 hours now. If he doesn't leave soon, he's going to miss the banquet altogether. He asked me to come find you for help. I raised an eyebrow. And how exactly am I supposed to help? As it happened, I actually could help. Without another word, I ran to my uncle's house and explained the situation. My uncle, who despised injustice, immediately rounded up a few of his friends, and soon, 3 Santana cars were heading straight for the Harper house. After a ridiculous amount of effort, Lily's parents finally relented, allowing her to leave for the wedding. But the banquet had already been delayed for so long that by the time the newlyweds arrived, the impatient guests had already devoured all the food. Lily's parents, who valued face more than anything, were furious. These people didn't even wait for the bride and groom. How disgraceful. They should compensate for ruining the banquet. But the guests weren't ones to be pushed around either. They fired back at Lily's mother. What kind of mother-in-law are you? Trying to squeeze your son-in-law dry before he's even married. Daniel is just a factory worker. He's young and hasn't been working for long. First, you made him buy furniture, then book an expensive banquet, and now demand cars? What's next? You want to bury him in debt before they even start their life together? This is embarrassing. Lily's mother's eyes widened in shock. What? This money was borrowed. Of course it was. Someone scoffed. Daniel stood there, his face burning with shame. Lily, on the other hand, was already in tears. Meanwhile, the guests grew even more frustrated. If the banquet had started at noon as planned, we'd be home by now. Instead, it's already 8 at night, and we're still sitting here waiting for you. And now you're asking us to pay for the banquet? Did you ever stop to think that we had to take a day off work to attend? We earn barely $10 a day. Are you going to compensate us for that? Lily's mother was so furious that she stomped her feet. On the verge of losing control, Lily hurriedly pulled her mother aside, bowing and apologizing to the guests. Daniel, seeing her do so, had no choice but to follow suit, though his face was filled with humiliation. After all, many of the people here were older than him and held higher positions than he did. The fact that they even came to his wedding was already a sign of respect. With the whole situation clearly Lily's mother's fault, there was no way he could make them pay for anything. And just like that, the wedding came to a chaotic end. Lily's mother, however, still felt like she had been wronged. Once the guests had left, she turned on her husband, dumping all the blame on him. I told you from the beginning I didn't want Lily to marry Daniel, but you said we couldn't refuse outright. So we had to make demands that would make him give up on his own. Well, look at what happened. Not only did he not back off, but he jumped through every hoop we set. And now, our daughter is married to him, and they're buried in debt. What are you going to do about it? Daniel finally realized what he truly meant to his mother-in-law and father-in-law. They had never thought he was good enough for Lily. And now, in their eyes, it was all my fault for pushing him into this mess. That very night, he showed up drunk at my doorstep, causing a scene. He jabbed a finger at my face and cursed me. You ruined me. You're the reason I'm buried in debt. You forced me into this marriage with Lily. If I end up miserable in the future, it's all because of you. Lily clung to him, crying and repeatedly apologizing to me. In the end, Daniel couldn't resist Lily's tears. With a pained expression, he collapsed onto his knees before her, begging for forgiveness. This whole mess is my mom's fault. You can't blame Megan. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't have even been able to get married in the first place. Daniel, don't worry. We still have a long road ahead of us. We'll get through this together. Lily Harper was so gentle and understanding. Just one sentence from her was enough to make Daniel stay quiet. When I got home, my mom scolded me for helping Daniel and Lily, but I simply told her, if I hadn't pushed them together, then I would have been the one Daniel tried to sink his claws into instead. My mom froze. What do you mean? I didn't hold back. Daniel originally wanted to pursue me because I'm the factory director's daughter. When I realized what he was after, I scared him away. After explaining everything, my mom gritted her teeth, grabbed my hand, and assured me, don't worry, I'll never pressure you into getting married. Even if you never marry in this lifetime, that's fine by me. But you absolutely cannot end up with someone as selfish and opportunistic as Daniel. After the chaos of the wedding, I focused on discussing my next round of inventory with my uncle and aunt. My aunt, who had been worried sick because my uncle's taxi business wasn't doing well, was stunned when she heard that I had turned my $2,000 investment into nearly $10,000. Her eyes practically lit up. I also handed over $1,000, which was my uncle's share from our last trip to the South. My aunt accepted the money, relieved, because it solved my cousin's school tuition problem. She was so moved that she teared up on the spot and immediately agreed to let my uncle join me in sourcing inventory. But buying goods wasn't as simple as just walking into a wholesale market and spending money. For the first few trips, I went south with my uncle and explained all the details of the trade to him. After a few rounds, he got the hang of it and was able to go on his own. Meanwhile, my aunt started selling alongside me. I sold gloves, she sold scarves. I sold hair clips, she sold hair ties. We sold different types of products so customers would visit both of our stalls. And there was no competition between us. The demand was so high that we often ran out of stock. Eventually, my aunt decided to stop selling and instead traveled with my uncle to buy more inventory, leaving me to focus entirely on selling. but there was only so much we could carry back ourselves. Wholesale markets also hesitated to sell large quantities to us, since we didn't have a physical store. On top of that, local authorities were cracking down on street vendors, making it harder for me to operate. Carrying limited stock and constantly moving around to avoid getting shut down wasn't a sustainable solution. Since I had some money saved up, I decided to rent a storefront. On opening day, my store was completely cleaned out by eager customers. My uncle and aunt couldn't stop smiling, and even my parents were left speechless at the sight of all the money I had earned. "Are you becoming a rich businesswoman now?" my dad asked in disbelief. I grinned. "If I'm a businesswoman, then you too are the parents of a businesswoman." It was only then that my parents realized I hadn't been playing around. I was serious about building my business. At the same time, my dad had an unsettling realization. If everyone preferred buying stylish, trendy goods from the South, then who would still want the outdated products made by his textile factory? My mom fell into deep thought as well. That's true. Compared to these Southern products, the stuff our factory makes isn't as attractive or practical. That night, neither of them could sleep. I could hear them tossing and turning in their room. I knew exactly what they were worried about. The country was going through a major transformation, and industries that couldn't keep up were being left behind. The factory's declining profits had already led to layoffs, and the upcoming winter season was bound to be tough. Right before the Lunar New Year, the factory issued official layoff notices. My mom was megang those let go. Even though my dad was the factory director, there was nothing he could do to help her. But instead of despairing, my mom just shed a few tears before brushing it off. "Our daughter is so capable now. I might as well retire early and enjoy life a little." But not everyone who lost their jobs took it so lightly. Daniel, in particular, was in deep trouble. Still drowning in debt from his extravagant wedding, he had become an outcast at work. Naturally, when layoffs came, his name was the first on the list. To make matters worse, his company-owned housing was taken away, forcing him to move in with Lily's family. Now unemployed and completely dependent on his in-laws, he barely left the house. He had turned into a stay-at-home son-in-law, which quickly made him the laughingstock of the town, and an unbearable burden to his mother-in-law. Lily Harper didn't want to spend the rest of her life living like this. She kept pressuring Daniel to find a job, but with his weak build, he wasn't suited for manual labor. One day, I posted a hiring notice for a sales assistant in front of my store. To my surprise, Daniel walked in, looking for work. The moment he saw me standing behind the cashier counter, he was visibly shocked. Why are you here? Are you the owner of this place?" I smiled and nodded. "Are you job hunting?" I asked. "Unfortunately, I only hire female sales assistants. You can see for yourself. I sell women's products." Daniel glanced around the store and let out a soft sigh. "That's great. You've become a boss now too." I didn't dwell on his words. Instead, I pulled out $1.500 from the drawer and handed it to him. "Back then, I played a part in pushing you and Lily together. I never expected her parents to be so cruel. Seeing you suffer like this. Well, this money is part of what I helped you borrow before. Take it and pay back the neighbors first." He froze and immediately shook his head. "I can't take this." I shook my head as well. "There's nothing wrong with taking it. Just focus on finding a job and building a future with Lily. Don't let money crush your hope for the future." I was encouraging him, but I was also making a point. I wanted him to see the vast difference between us now. But Daniel didn't seem to get it. His eyes turned red as he took the money, and when he looked at me again, there was something unsettling in his gaze, a hint of longing that had no place between us. "Megan, if..." He hesitated. "If I hadn't married Lily back then, would we have had a chance?" I looked past him and saw Lily walking into the store, drawn by the job posting. With a helpless sigh, I nodded. "Yes, we would have had a chance." Daniel immediately grew emotional. "Megan, the moment Lily's mother demanded 64 legs of furniture, I wanted to give up on her. I wanted to pursue you. But what you said that day, it broke my heart. Now, my life with Lily has turned into this mess. I regret it so much. If I divorce Lily, will you give me another chance? I swear, I'll love you for the rest of my life." I let out a soft laugh and spoke clearly, directing my words toward the teary-eyed Lily standing behind him. Did you hear that? Do you agree to the divorce? Lily wiped her tears and suddenly threw her handbag at Daniel. You heartless bastard. I gave up my own parents for you. And this is how you repay me? You're disgusting. She trembled with anger. Fine. You want a divorce? You got it. Because of Lily's presence, Daniel never got to take the $1.500. Not long after, I didn't hear news of their divorce. Instead, I learned that Lily was pregnant. Under pressure from her parents, she ended up carrying the child of a county official's son. The Harpers immediately tried to force Daniel into a divorce. Daniel, however, refused unless he was compensated with $20,000. The Harper family didn't have that kind of money, so they tried to ask the county official's son for help, but he wasn't a fool. He had only been toying with Lily and had no intention of taking responsibility. Realizing the truth about her affair, Lily finally abandoned her parents' dream of marrying into wealth. She reconciled with Daniel once again, and the two of them tried to follow my path, sourcing goods and setting up a street stall. But the market had changed since I first started. More and more people were setting up stalls. Competition was fierce, and with the rise of branded stores, customers were less inclined to trust street vendors. Meanwhile, my small shop had already been running successfully for 2 or 3 years, completely outclassing them. As my business flourished, I decided to expand. My uncle and aunt fully supported the idea, but with a bigger store came a greater need for stock. That's when my uncle had an idea. If I upgrade my driver's license to operate a larger truck, I could haul more goods from the south in a single trip. It'd save us time and transport costs. My aunt agreed. Renting a truck every time is too expensive. If we buy our own, we can handle everything ourselves. With a larger truck, our time became more flexible, and we felt more secure knowing we could transport large quantities in one trip. This completely solved our supply chain issues. After opening my second store, the third and fourth naturally followed. I even established direct relationships with manufacturers through the wholesale market, cutting out middlemen and securing the lowest possible prices. This ensured that no newly opened store or street vendor could compete with me on price. Meanwhile, Lily and Daniel's street stall barely lasted 2 months before collapsing. The debts they had incurred from their wedding had already lost much of their value due to inflation, and within a few months of working factory jobs in Guangzhou, they managed to pay off the remaining $1.500. When I went to Guangzhou to open a chain branch, I happened to see them at a factory. I originally thought they had settled into stable jobs and wouldn't be doing too badly, but then I overheard the factory manager complaining that Daniel and Lily were troublemakers. Daniel spent his days trying to curry favor with the factory owner's daughter, while Lily dressed extravagantly and tried to seduce the factory manager. Unfortunately for them, neither the owner nor his daughter were easy targets, and the factory was already considering getting rid of them. I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. At 40, I returned to my hometown as a successful entrepreneur to give a speech. The townspeople welcomed me warmly. Among those who came to pick me up was none other than Daniel. He looked utterly defeated. His hair was graying, his clothes worn, and he had the tired, beaten look of someone far older than 40. After my speech, I attended a banquet with the local officials. I had never been good with alcohol, so my husband stepped in and drank on my behalf. Daniel, have you forgotten how you used to tease me when I was little? My husband said with a smile. Daniel frowned at first, trying to recall. Then, recognition dawned on him. The man speaking to him was none other than the little boy who had played in the yard with me years ago. The same boy who had once promised to marry me when he grew up. You two got married? Daniel asked. Stunned, I chuckled. Honestly, I didn't expect him to be so persistent. He chased me around the world, and as he got older, he just kept getting more handsome. In the end, I couldn't hold on to my pride as a woman and gave in. My husband smirked. Yeah, I may have been born 10 years later, but thankfully, Megan was too busy building her business to date. That gave me a chance. Daniel opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he swallowed his words. After the banquet, my husband and I drove back to the city. As we passed the village entrance, I caught sight of Daniel standing there with a pitiful expression. "Daniel looks miserable," my husband remarked. "What's so miserable about him?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. My husband sighed. 10 years ago. He divorced Lily. He went to the city to look for you, but you weren't at the store. Instead, he saw me and asked where you were. Sensing something was off, I asked, "And what did you tell him?" "I told him you had gone to Europe and wouldn't be back anytime soon," my husband admitted with a slight smirk. I was shocked. "And then?" He leaned back casually. "Well, I didn't expect him to actually go to Europe to look for you, but he did." I was speechless. He continued, "From what I heard, his life there was miserable. He had to work 3 jobs just to survive. On top of that, he was constantly harassed and beaten because of his race. Honestly, thinking back on it now, I feel a little guilty." Hearing him pretend to sound remorseful, I couldn't help but laugh. At 20, he had already been so cunning. That night, as he held me in his arms while we slept, I faintly heard him murmur in his sleep, "Megan, I'll never let you suffer again in this lifetime." As for Daniel and Lily, they got exactly what they deserved. I felt exhaustion wash over me and slowly closed my eyes, too lazy to even think about the deeper meaning behind his words. All that mattered was that I was living my happiest life.